Hi there. China has decided to develop the island of Hainan into a pilot free trade zone with the eventual inclusion of a free trade port, the first ever in the country. President Xi Jinping announced that the special economic zone would lead the way in greater market liberalization, a proactive move by China to support further globalization. How will new policies be developed and implemented in the forthcoming plan? What opportunities and challenges will there be for enterprises, both domestic and foreign? And what impact will Hainan's pilot free trade zone have for China's further reform and opening up? To discuss these issues and more, I'm very happy to be joined in the Beijing studio by Professor Jiang Gong from the University of International Business and Economics and Andy Mark, founder of Red Pagoda Resources. We shall also speak via satellite to Jeffrey Tucker, an American writer on economic issues. That's our topic. This is Dialogue. I'm Yang Rui. But before we get started, let's look at this.
30 years after Hainan Island became a province and a special economic zone, Chinese President Xi Jinping called for an acceleration of its development into a center for international tourism and consumption. Hainan's tourism industry has grown rapidly, but it suffered from growing pains. During this year's Spring Festival, thousands of holiday makers returning home were stuck in a massive traffic jam on the island. Speaking in Beijing in March, the mayor of Sanya said there's a need for improvement.
Our tourism industry lacks high-end and competitive products. The quality of relevant services cannot meet international standard yet.
President Xi says a series of actions are needed to make Hainan an international resort. They include offering better quality services.
There are so many tourists running over here and there.
Here in Dadonghai Bay, police officer Li Shuifang has just resolved a dispute over a dangerous ball game on the beach. She has been learning English for decades, which helps her to do a better job. Each day, Li and her colleagues help dozens of tourists from all over the world. But this is just a small part of the job for China's first tourist police patrol. The captain of the division tells us that they specialize in answering queries, resolving disputes, and cracking down on crime.
We will equip our team with more high-tech devices to quickly respond to emergencies, to monitor tourist sites, and to translate. We're working with institutes to train our police officers in foreign languages to overcome the language barrier and better serve our overseas friends.
The province also wants to boost sales. Hainan has one of the world's largest duty-free shopping centers, and it's now the fourth island in the world to pilot an offshore duty-free policy. It aims to extend offshore duty-free shopping to all outbound tourists. Hainan is also seeking innovative ways to attract visitors. For instance, this luxury hotel resort that will officially open in late April. It's not just an accommodation. It also includes an aquarium and a water park, where visitors can explore an underwater wonderland and get right up close to creatures of the sea.
I think especially Hainan Bay has gained another international brand that is well known for its entertainment destination. I think also the building as such in the project is the new landmark of Sanya and Hainan tourism.
Resembling its better-known twin on Dubai's Palm Island, the hotel is a reflection of Hainan's ambitions to turn itself into the Dubai of China. The government wants Hainan to welcome global investors, becoming a free trade zone by 2020 and a free trade port by 2025. Here in Sanya, the Phoenix Island International Cruise Port is welcoming an ever-increasing number of people from the rest of the world, and the island can look forward to a brighter future.
Gentlemen, we've got strong mixed feelings from the general public following the policy announcement by President Xi Jinping commemorating the 30th anniversary of Hainan. Back in 1988, it was established as both a province as well as a special economic zone. But do you think, people have been more cautious than optimistic about the prospects? Will it be transformed into Hawaii, Singapore, or any other examples of a free trade zone? What do you think?
Well, I think the prospects for Hainan are very bright. People call it the Hawaii of China because of its great beaches. I think it also has the opportunity to perhaps even be the Las Vegas of China, in that the old bad old days of Las Vegas or the new Las Vegas, meaning that it's a destination for conventions, for family holidays, entertainment. So I think that...
Anything but casino, I'm afraid.
Yes.
Given the high-handed anti-graft campaign that the Communist Party of China launched.
Well,
do you think government officials or billionaires would go to Hainan, yet another way of gold rush, simply for casino itself?
But I think
nobody would talk about casino.
But that being said, Yang Rui, I think that the government is looking at some limited gambling type activities like lotteries and sports lotteries in Hainan. So to me, at least, it's a question mark. But I think you're absolutely correct. It's a very sensitive question.
Regarding casino, my understanding is that it's going to take at least 3 more years before we can see that, because we need to change the criminal code first. We have to change our law first, and that's going to take some time. The casino business is a little bit further down the road. But I think overall, I think the government's aspiration is very clear. Try to make this a combination of, say, Hawaii and Dubai, as well as Singapore. It's not just only about tourism and they're also talking about elderly care, health care, and also high-tech investments. So it's more than just the tourism. But that's a tall order, though. I think still the jury is out there to see whether it can succeed at that level.
But it seems so far, taking Sanya as an example, is none other than yet another Florida for seasonal migrant birds to enjoy the sunshine instead of making serious investment in high-tech incubation. With the preferential policies, what do you think of the human resources compared with Shenzhen, which is a big success story?
Well, I think there's a couple points there. So you're absolutely right that tourism is very seasonal. But as John mentioned, too, some of these other areas that the government is looking at encouraging, such as medical tourism, which is less seasonal, making it a free trade zone, free port, meaning that goods can be brought in not only without tariffs, but also with no customs procedures, so it reduces the amount of time it takes. So that could turn Hainan into a regional logistics center. So I think there's a lot on the plate, I think, as John said. It's a very ambitious plan, but we look at places like Shenzhen, we look at Pudong. There was a lot of skepticism initially, and I would say never bet against the Chinese government when it comes to these grand type projects.
But there is a big sea difference between Shanghai, Shenzhen, and Hainan. Are we talking about the market incentives or policy incentives? Let me cross over to Mr. Jeffrey Tucker, an American writer on economic issues. He's standing by in Atlanta. Hello. Jeffrey?
Hello.
What do you make of Hainan?
Yes.
Will it be yet another Hawaii or Florida?
I think it's very possible. I must say the news absolutely lifted my heart just reading about it, because it's great to see, especially from an American point of view, some expression of confidence in the idea of free trade and free commerce. And I think this is the secret sauce to prosperity, and Hainan has everything else. And this encouragement of free trade, particularly with regard to medical tourism. I mean, Americans are going to absolutely love this, and that's why Wall Street just went nuts on any stocks that were linked to Hainan when the announcement was made. So this is tremendously exciting, and I'm wildly optimistic. If anything remotely close to the plans that have been announced come true, then I think we've got a prescription for something wonderful to develop.
But what do you think of the downside of Hainan? Jeffrey, do you think there will be adversity about human resources? Don't forget, Hainan don't forget, Jeffrey, Hainan is part of the forefront against the 9-dash line in the South China Sea, where we see turbulent waters rocking the boat of the U.S.-China relationship.
Yeah, I don't see any downside whatsoever. I mean, the only downside is maybe political, that they wouldn't go far enough, too restrictive on, for example, gambling. But if we can get some real movement on things like free import of pharmaceuticals and low licensing laws on the medical industry, security for people's investments, very low taxes, deregulated environment, and continued encouragement of multinationals and this port that's being proposed. To me, this is all the things you need to build a great center of prosperity. I mean, the potential for Hainan to contribute to China's overall productivity is immense. I mean, most Americans don't understand this or even know this, that China's economy is overall already substantially larger than the U.S.
But I'm afraid the local residents and government officials in Hainan are more cautious than optimistic about the future of this island, given the fact that this island has three groups of people, locals, those from the northernmost provinces of Heilongjiang.
Right.
They want to go to Sanya to enjoy the sunshine, but Haikou is a very different place because of the weather differences, and we also have Russians. They also come from a very cold place.
Right.
So if you have these three groups of people categorically, how could you enjoy economic takeoff? With the benefits of the preferential policies, do you think more talented professionals will leave Beijing, Shanghai, or other competitive second-tier cities and head for Hainan? I mean, a lot of questions to be answered.
No, I think that's true, Yang Wei, but one of the key issues, to go back to the point you raised earlier about human resources, for those that have been to Hainan, especially Sanya, there is a noticeable gap in service at the hotels, especially the higher-end hotels, compared to a place like Shanghai, not to speak of New York or Paris. But that this is an opportunity, too, because Hainan Island is only 9 million people. It's 11,000 square miles, which is about the size of Belgium, and yet Belgium is about 11 million people. So it's not only there's not enough people, which might sound odd talking about any place in China, but also I think the level...
Excuse me, Brussels
Belgium
is the attraction. Brussels is the capital city of Belgium. It is the place for the NATO headquarters and headquarters of the European Union. Hainan has nothing.
You're very negative on Hainan. But
my job is to raise questions.
So, but what I would say, Yang Wei, is that...
It has the most important thing, which will be free.
Yes, Jeffrey.
More important than anything else. I mean, yeah, it's got the most important thing, which is an encouragement of commerce and freedom and investment. That's more important than a NATO headquarters. I mean, Washington, D.C. has the largest government in the world, and it's almost an economic basket case. Nobody wants to invest there. So I think Hainan's, the point is the institutions and the encouragement, especially of immigration. You know, I think from an American point of view, getting a job in a high-end hotel and a resort in an entertainment industry in Hainan sounds like the dream of a lifetime.
No, I mean,
it'll be very attractive.
Excuse me, Jeffrey, the tourism industry depends on the season. It is only in the winter when people would go to Hainan. So the boom of the local business is, I mean, short term. It depends on the season.
Yeah, I mean, we have 9 million people in Hainan, and you know the total population moving in and out of the only airport in Hainan is about 50 million, passengers every year. And you can see that most of the people who are living there, they treat this as a second place or second home, and sometimes it's very difficult to start a sort of a economy based on high tech, based on venture capital, based on sort of the more advanced economies, if the local economy is basically a community of second homes. Actually, I want to point out one example though. Tampa, Florida. As we know, Florida is a place that very much like we're trying to do with respect to Hainan Island. People move from the East Coast down to Florida in the summertime. It's a second place for second homes. And Tampa is trying to foster a high-tech industry, and that's been. I don't think it's been quite successful so far. They made some progress, but it's not as successful as, for example, the high-tech centers, for example, the Triangle in North Carolina, in other places. So I think I think you're absolutely right. It's really an issue of human resources. Do we have a good university there? Do we have, good students, good people, who take this as their place of their first home, as opposed to a place to spend some time in the summertime?
But here's the beauty of the tourism industry. Let me quickly make this point. The beauty of the tourism industry, though, is that you do not need college graduates. It's a great magnet, a great way to put low-skilled labor to work. Many people get their start working as a housekeeper, working as a front desk clerk. And China also has imbalances in labor force. So you look at a place like Dongbei in the northeast with a labor surplus. So with a labor shortage in Hainan, this is actually, I think, one very interesting way to where Hainan can play a positive role nationally. The other Florida example I would cite is not only Tampa, but Orlando. Because look at Orlando, it's the home of Disney World. And that has been an incredible economic engine.
A lot of growth in this area. Yeah. I also want to add one thing. I think there's some handicap respect to its infrastructure. I have a classmate who is running a real estate business there. So I really trust what he told me. He said that the Hainan airport, the only airport in Hainan right now, is running at 24 hours a day. Okay, it's the busiest airport at least in China. And during the last storm in Hainan, we can see that how much stress is placed on this. And I look at this. We have 40 million people in and out of island. Only one airport, right? No bridge. No tunnel.
Are you suggesting that the construction of the basic infrastructure will come in the first place?
I think this is absolutely
groundwork.
I think it's absolutely necessary. With
and
the current
high-speed railway is the second choice.
Right. They have a round island, a medium-speed railroad. But I think the issue is that we have to have reliable and also actually quite economic transportation. Right now it's actually pretty expensive. You book a ticket to fly to Hainan. It's more expensive than flying to, say, Bangkok or Kuala Lumpur. So we need this reliable transportation in and out of Hainan. Another airport, or at least another runway on the airport, tunnels, and the bridge probably.
Infrastructure building and investment in this area is, of course, the advantage of the mainland. What do you think, Jeffrey? Hainan faces a strong competition, and of course, it's the envy of the neighboring countries and provinces. Like Singapore, Hong Kong, they're not very happy. Even the city of Guilin, capital city of Guangxi province, would say, hey, what do you mean by establishing yourself as yet another conference center to attract delegations from ASEAN countries? I mean, Guangxi has done every bit it could to attract, conferences. The conference is an economy, right? It's an industry, Jeffrey.
Yeah, no, I mean, I can totally imagine American companies wanting to come to Hainan for conferences. I mean, Americans love China and would love to come for something like this. And
the Russians would be very happy. Don't forget, the biggest population of overseas tourists is Russian. I mean, Russians have been converging there to enjoy the sunshine. They moved from Siberia to Hainan. I mean, Americans, well, come on.
Yeah, the analogy is the Canadians flying to Florida, right? We have a lot of Canadians flying to Florida every year.
Okay. So Jeffrey, go ahead.
Yeah, I was going to say on the infrastructure point, if the demand is there and the investment is allowed, then the supply will provide for itself. There will be many American companies and European companies that will be very excited to set up infrastructure that would actually turn out to be profitable. I don't imagine that these even have to require any kind of government sponsorship, actually. There's plenty of foreign investment that would be thrilled to invest in the future of something as beautiful as this province.
Well, one of the attractions for young, talented professionals to go there is the low tax rate. But then the rising housing prices will threaten to compromise this advantage of the policy. What do you think of the incentives?
Well, I think these pressures are there in any fast-growing area, but I think that they're going to be less severe in a place like Hainan. Again, if we just go back to this idea, there's 9 million people in 11,000 square miles. This is about less than half the population of Beijing. I mean, why do we have these housing price pressures in places like Beijing? It's because the space is limited. It's the population density that drives housing prices. So I think as long as the government has adequate zoning, real estate developers are willing to build affordable housing. Land is certainly not an issue. I mean, we have to bear in mind the infrastructure in terms of electricity, plumbing, ecological impact. But I think that housing as a concern probably ought to be less of a problem than in these Tier 1 cities in China.
Let's look at Sanya. Sanya is the pearl of the crown in Hainan province, largely because of the weather. Therefore, it has become the holiday-making beach. It's the sunshine city, very similar to Florida. But those who go to Hainan would seldom consider investment in the real estate market in Haikou, the capital city of Hainan, because of the weather difference. It's a lot colder in the winter than in Sanya. So maybe Haikou is a different story by establishing incubation for high-tech development. What do you think of the idea of having a free port? But the free port is yet another sensitive issue considering the military bases in Hainan.
I guess that's less of a concern if the government is serious about really developing that part of the island into a commercial center. There's also a place where there's trade taking place, and there's also other ancillary businesses surrounding, for example, the visions government talk about setting up exchanges for commodities, for example, for oil and for other commodities. I think that poses a real competition to places like Hong Kong, Singapore. We talk about who are not very happy about this. Other than, of course, the people most unhappy about this, people in Guangxi province, because they be expecting government, investment into that area. But instead, the government is still picking up Hainan. Other than these people, I think it really poses a competitive pressure on the state of Singapore. Singapore and Hong Kong are already quite crowded. The port's facilities are already crowded. So as a way of taking some business away from these two places, and also this is under firm control of the Chinese government, and this is also complementary to the vision of the Belt and Road Initiative to establish a chain of what they call pearls around the Indian Ocean and also the South China Sea area. And so in that aspect, there's strategic importance in making this a success from China's perspective, I guess.
The history of Hainan over the past 3 decades is one of mixed feelings, bubbles in the real estate market in the first place, and what's left behind is the only Mazda brand of the automobile assembly line, and that's a very interesting story. So what do you know about the history of Hainan? Jeffrey?
Well, I understand that there's been, the enterprise zone has been itself compromised by excessive government subsidies, and that's usually always a mistake. When you set up these kinds of zones, you want as much freedom as possible and not game the results with policies designed to provide excessive subsidies to real estate that becomes unviable. And I don't know whether or not this lesson has been learned. In the U.S., this lesson has yet to be learned. Probably every time Washington, D.C. sets up an enterprise zone of some sort, they end up just subsidizing it and creating useless structures and investing in things that don't become viable over the long term. And I think some of that might have happened in Hainan. But from what I understand about this most recent announcement, this is not so much of a tax-backed, program. It's not so much of a government-funded thing, but rather a kind of a laissez-faire policy. Hands-off, less regulation, more free trade, more encouragement of investment, a welcoming to multinationals, and a willingness to let economic development take its own course according to supply and demand. And to me, that's a much more encouraging path forward.
To turn Hainan into a success story, I'm afraid, depends on two things. One is, of course, policy incentives. The other is the most important factor, the market incentives. Well, perhaps my question sounds a little bit too pessimistic about the prospects of the island. Preferential policies do make a difference. For example, what do you think of the health industry, given the tropical weather? Healthcare centers or spa centers are likely to be established in a place like Sanya. But elsewhere, Haikou, Boao, even halfway through, their weather conditions are very different. So what do you think of, say, other growth points, like using Hainan to build high-speed railways, hotels? We mentioned high-end commercial real estate and tourism facilities. These are the old stories. But what about the idea of having more of the health centers?
Well, I think that's clearly part of the plan. I mean, my understanding that it's not as much maybe health centers per se, but what we could call medical tourism, where facilities are set up, specialized hospitals, whether it's cosmetic surgery, hip replacement, knee replacement, and that because of both the cost and the quality, one can attract patients from all around the world. And I know there have been efforts in the United States. Jeffrey's probably more familiar with this, but because the cost of medical procedures in the United States is so expensive that some insurance companies now find that if they give a person a business class ticket, a stay at a five-star hotel to come to China for a hip replacement, it's actually cheaper than if they did it in the United States. The question, of course, is will consumers accept this? Because there's a certain fear of going to a foreign country, especially, I think, the perception is that China is not as modern with healthcare. So there's clearly a PR marketing issue that has to be addressed. But I think this could be a very good growth.
It's actually an example of what you're talking about. Right now, I know people in the U.S., they fly to Barbados. It's a small little island in the Caribbean, and it's a very nice place to visit, and clean and nice. And there's a booming kind of the medical tourism industry going on right now. And I think in this region, the Asian Pacific region, there are got to be more millionaires and billionaires than people can fly from from state of Denver or sort of state of Colorado or Wyoming. I mean, this area is full of millionaires, and it's actually, I think it probably is a pretty good value proposition to have people flying to Hainan for this kind of a high-end medical treatment as well as tourism at the same time, healthcare at the same time.
And let's not forget, too, that Trump's tariffs have been specifically targeted against imports that are related to medical technology from China. Titanium for knee replacements and other things. It's going to make raise the cost of healthcare in the U.S. and only incentivize Americans to look more carefully into this idea of medical tourism, which has really picked up over the last 10 years and might just become a way of life for Americans going forward. This is one way to get around import restrictions and tariffs, is just get a ticket to Hainan.
President Xi Jinping released the ambitious blueprint about Xiong'an construction. Well, but the Xiong'an is located between Tianjin and Beijing, and that enjoys the advantage of location. Hainan is an island cut off from the mainland. So will it be a blessing or a curse? It depends on whether policy incentives will be transformed into reality. Very quickly, what do you think of the future? Are you optimistic?
I am optimistic given that there is adequate infrastructure, especially I think as John mentioned, transportation is absolutely key. What made Hong Kong so successful was a convenient airport as well as its location.
I think Hainan has a very good prospect of developing to something like a Florida, Hawaii. But when it reach the level of, say, Singapore, that's still the
Singapore depends on Malacca. Okay. and Jeffrey, very quickly.
Of course, I'm wildly optimistic, and as I said, it lifts my heart to read the news. And
thank you for your rosy picture about the future of Hainan. With that, we conclude this discussion about Hainan, which will enjoy a lot of the preferential policies, but the issue is whether it will be yet another Hawaii or Florida. I'll see you next time. Goodbye.
Thank you.